Hello everyone, this is our presentation, The Impact of Social Change on Mental Health. My name is Gabriela Estevez, and we have Kat Oysen, and we are both school psychology interns at MCPS. So Kat, I'll turn it over to you to start with the definition of social change.
Thank you. All right, social change, what is it? Social change in sociology, it is the alteration of mechanisms within the social structure characterized by changes in cultural symbols, rules of behavior, social organizations, or value systems. In short, it's a large mental or physical shift that impacts the world we live in especially how we interact in relationships. In our lifetime, we've seen many social changes resulting from social movements. These social movements challenge the current social dynamic in order to address negative social impacts, such as injustice or discrimination, or practical ones, such as the introduction of mobile devices for communication purposes. Why is social change so hard? Well, there's many reasons for why change is so hard, but the main reason is because it's uncomfortable. It challenges the rules and dynamics on how we interact with each other. For example, in the United States mainstream culture, we've normalized women wearing pants, shorts, and non-skirt options. But in the 19th and 20th century, there were laws against women wearing these types of garments, and these rules even carried out jail time. This is a demonstration on how the women's rights movement has impacted the larger mainstream culture in the United States, because it challenged the idea of what it means to be a woman in modern day society and her freedom to be able to dress as she pleases. Brunner theorized that human development is shaped by how the individual and the environment interact with one another. The environment is broken up into three different systems: the microsystem, which is all your immediate relationships, such as your family and friends; the exosystem, which is the larger environment in which your relationships interact; and the macrosystem, which encompasses all of those relationships and interactions by dictating social rules and cultural expectations. Not only does the system have an effect on the individual has an effect on the system. But when the larger systems, such as the macro or exosystem, is affected, it can have a greater impact on the individual. When there is significant change, such as a global pandemic, our sense of control is disoriented and we can end up feeling helpless. And I'm going to turn it over to Gabriela for the next slide.
Let's talk a bit about our social brains. So you may have heard of the term humans are social creatures, and let's break down why that is. Evolutionary biologists have long proposed that the relevance of our social environment and relationships is for adaptive purposes. By adaptive, we mean that behaviors that help humans to adapt to changing environments. By engaging in adaptive behaviors, we are able to fulfill our most basic biological instincts to survive and reproduce. Evidence of the importance of our social environment and relationships in humans are found in studies that show how these processes significantly affect our health and our behaviors. For example, studies show that social support from those around us, like family, friends, parents, and teachers, is directly related to our physical and mental health. Individuals who self-report lower quality social relationships are at an increased rate for physical illness and mental illness, like depression. Stress and trauma have deep biological implications for human functioning. In the context of our social environment, stress-inducing social events and traumas, such as discrimination and prejudice, can have detrimental effects on our physical and mental health too. Traits of altruism and empathy are important factors in navigating our social world. Empathy for others is key to forming social relationships, and altruistic behaviors enable us to build on these relationships. Lastly, our social environment and relationships shapes our cultural norms and practices, which affects every aspect of our lives. Just think, how do you think your family, neighborhood, school, state, or country of origin have shaped how you view and interact with the world? Next slide, please. Thank you, Kat. So how do we process social information? Let's dive a little bit deeper into the science of how our brains process this information. Our brains process intense loads of information every day, including social information. This act depends on a symphony of brain processes, including memory, language, emotions, executive functioning, and our sensory system, like visual, auditory, and smell processes. Think of all the mechanics that go into having a simple conversation with a friend. Memory processes allow you to retrieve information such as who your friend is and the topic of conversation. Language allows us to understand the conversation and communicate our opinions or feelings. Our emotions provide us with information, like how we feel about the topic or our friends. Our executive functioning system allows us to organize our thoughts and keep track of that conversation. Our sensory system enables us to gather more information from that social interaction, like reading our friends' facial expressions and body language. In order to make sense of our social environment, our brain relies heavily on information gathered from past experiences and uses this information to make predictions about what might happen. In order to more efficiently synthesize all this prior information, our brain organizes this information into schemas, which are mental representations or models. For example, how do we know a brand new model of a car is in fact a car? Our brain has organized all of our past experiences of cars into a schema that allows us to quickly recognize a car when we see it, even if we've never seen that particular car before. These schemas allow us to make predictions and inferences about what might happen. For example, that the car you're seeing probably requires a key to get into it, and it can travel at high speeds. Next slide, please. Thank you. Schemas are natural and allow us to navigate our world as quickly as we do. However, our schemas are not perfect, and they can be prone to error. In our social world, we use schemas to make inferences about how other people act or react. For example, if you see someone who you perceive to be a woman walking down the street, your schema about women may tell you that she would prefer certain colors or styles of clothing over others, behave in a certain manner, or is more likely to hold certain types of occupations. Unfortunately, our schemas often put us in the position of making assumptions and judgments of groups of people. This can lead to stereotyping, which is the overgeneralized belief about a group of people. In the example of seeing a woman walk down the street, you may assign stereotypes of women to her, such as she's likely has skirts and dresses in her closet, she may not understand sports or be overly emotional. It's important to remember that stereotypes are overgeneralizations, not truths, and they can be pretty harmful. While schemas are not inherently bad, they can get us into trouble if we don't reflect on what our schemas are telling us and take active steps to avoid stereotyping others. This is especially difficult since our brains are hardwired to be as efficient as possible when it comes to processing information and organizing it, which means that information that goes against our schemas is often ignored. In this way, schemas can be resistant to change. Next slide, please. Thank you. Looking at social change and mental health. As individuals, our mental health and representations of the world are hugely impacted by our environment. In turn, we're also active participants in our social environment. Notice in this diagram that the relation between the environment and the individual is represented in a cyclical manner and is not one-sided. In all contexts, we are constantly influencing our environment and being influenced by it. This is related to what Kat talked about earlier with Bronfenbrenner when thinking of those concentric circles that you saw. That it causes a sort of inner ripple effect when there are different changes between the individual and the environment. And I will give it right back to Kat to talk about the next slide.
So currently we are in what is called a dual pandemic. There are massive social changes that we're undergoing. COVID-19, a transition to digital learning, a racial social movement, and all of these things are happening simultaneously. And it's overwhelming to have so much in our lives feel out of our control. So in order to feel in control of something, our brain does what we call coping. And engagement and disengagement coping are two types of ways in which our brain is trying to handle that change and all that messy emotional and mental consequences that go with adjusting our schemas and trying to decide against the biases. So our first type is engagement coping. Engagement coping refers to the voluntary responses directed towards the source of stress or stress-related cognitions, emotions, such as problem solving, reflection, and emotional expression. For example, when someone gets upset, they may feel like they need to cry. And you might ask, that's a coping strategy? Yes, it's a natural response to the body and mind being overwhelmed either with the situation or how that person is feeling. It acts as a release for all those emotions, so while it may not resolve the actual problem, it's important that you're not shying away from what you're feeling. On the other hand, disengagement coping is just the opposite. It refers to the voluntary responses directed away from the source of stress or stress-related cognitions and emotions, such as avoidance or denial. Just to clarify, this isn't about the difference between what is good and what is bad. However, disengagement coping can be considered unhealthy or non-beneficial when it's used incorrectly, such as the use of alcohol and drugs or engaging in risky behavior. When used occasionally, disengagement coping can be beneficial. For example, when there is sustained trauma, like a global pandemic, and this may not be typical behavior, it can really be beneficial. But there is a difference between taking a break from something and avoiding it entirely, especially when it becomes detrimental to a person's physical, mental, or emotional well-being. For example, maybe avoiding social media works for you. Then that's great. But maybe you like to read what's going on because it provides the ability to be aware or in control of your environment and what you know. That's also really good. But at the end of the day, using appropriate coping strategies, engagement or disengagement, isn't about what's good and bad. It's about what's going to benefit you. So I'm going to let Gabriella take the lead on this one.
Thank you, Kat. So in thinking about all the social changes that have been happening, especially of recent, a lot of that social change can bring about feelings of stress, and we may need some coping strategies to kind of help ourselves process those more difficult emotions. This is related to what Kat was talking about with engagement coping. So we've listed here a few different positive coping strategies to help individuals process, reflect, and really get that time to go through some difficult emotions. So here we have taking a break from social media, talking with a friend or relative about what might be bothering you or things you're having problems with, seeking mental health support. This can look like talking to the school counselor, a school psychologist, or engaging in therapy with a professional. Physical exercise is excellent for increasing endorphins in the body and getting yourself moving. Journaling or expressive writing are great reflective processes for kind of writing out how you might be feeling. And if you want to channel that energy that you're feeling into something a bit more positive, maybe thinking about social activism. So signing petitions, fundraising, and those types of things. And that is all we have for you today. We have our references listed at the end of the slide. Thank you for attending our presentation.